And I remember the morning of the interview, I'm like, okay, I've done whatever I can. And I like, let me just sit to meditate. And I could feel I was very aware of the anxiety that I was facing. And when I sat to meditate, I could feel just like an overwhelming amount of vibration, like in the top right. And it was so clear.
We recently released, well, not we, Daji recently released Spiritual Anatomy. And so he talks a lot about the points, the chakras, and how they correlate specifically with different conditions and different experiences. Yeah. Do you feel like you can, I mean, I was reading it and I was like, oh, that happened then. That happened then. Not everything was one-to-one, but it was really nice to read it retroactively. Is there any place in the book that resonated with you in terms of your journey through the...
Yeah.
I'm on page 80 currently of the book. And so one thing definitely that stood out for me from the book was, I believe it mentioned about 3 types of attitude you need towards practice. And that was liveliness, humility, and urgency. And what really stood out to me, the word was liveliness. If I were to sum up my last year, 2023, I believe it was a journey to be lively again, because I think I got really lost into this idea of like, I'm married and like, it's all about family now. It's all about like giving up what you love and all. And I was talking to like people like you and like other friends I had, and it's like, no, like you can be joyful too, like, or something like you don't have to attach yourself to other people. Like, yes, you can serve them and be happy with them or like share joy with them, but you also need to find like joy within yourself, or like you need to value yourself equally. And it did not happen necessarily because of marriage. It was maybe like conversations or like some incidents that triggered off that, I don't know, emotion. And once you get triggered off, everything you see and start seeing in that lens, right? And when I read that word liveliness and like approaching your practice or even approaching life with liveliness, and basically for me, like enthusiasm and passion. I was just talking to my father-in-law the other day, and I was asking him like, if there's one skill or like one thing you definitely want your children to have, what would it be? And he's like, passion or enthusiasm for life. You can like be all saint-like, give up on life and, you know, transcend everything. But then what's the joy that you've taken this birth for? Like, what's pushing you to live forward for another day? What are you living for? Like, it's easy to die for, right? But what is something that's keeping you alive? And it's like tuning in more and more to that joy, to that liveliness. Like, how can I bring life into everything I do? And how can I, like, anytime I see this guy depressed or like slipping into that phase of like, I'm sad, I'm like, yo, get up. Like, we need to go out, like, be lively again. Like, I believe my inner nature is happiness. And anytime I feel sad, it's literally the silliest of things, or maybe some big feelings I haven't learned to process yet, or I just need to sit it down, cry it out, or just find someone to blame or who can take that emotion. Like, just, it's not that person's fault, but just like, let me speak to that about it. And once that's gone and disappeared, 2 minutes later, I find myself fake laughing and then actually laughing and just like, that was just, that wasn't so bad now. And it's just starting to get better day by day then. So I really like that concept of liveliness towards anything.
Yeah, that's a good reminder.
Yeah. Mine is very different. I would say like, I have a moment, this is like several years ago, but like I would, in general, especially when talking about spiritual anatomy, like I like went to Georgia Tech, and like that's also the time that I became an instructor. So I think it was very innate to the way I think and the way that I teach as well, is like being pretty methodical about like the way that we collect the data from like how we're feeling. Because having grown up around heartfulness, it's like you mentioned in the caveat earlier, it's like you grow up hearing so many different stories of like, so-and-so came to me in the form of this and blah, 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 blah. And you're like, and so when I first meditated ever, it was like on a marble floor in front of, Chariji, and there's 100 people behind me. And like, it was an hour and 20 minutes. And typically it shouldn't be more than an hour. I don't know. And then like, I remember all I could think about was like chocolate and my to-do list. And I felt so like deflated afterwards because I was like, I felt nothing. Like I thought I was supposed to feel something and go into the Zen zone and like achieve something. And anyways, I think what led me, like what I realized later on in my journey was that like, it's a lot like you have to put in the work and start collecting the data, and you start noticing things over time. And the more you observe, the more you're able to appreciate, because things are often happening at a very subtle level. And like our lives are not typically even attuned to what's happening inside. And so, yeah, it was really like, I've spent probably a year or two just like working with my instructor of like, he would just ask me after every session of like, do you feel any vibrational difference, like left versus right? And at first I would be like, sure, like maybe my left side feels vibrationally lighter, but I don't know what that means. And like, maybe it's just because I worked out or like I'm, feeling anxious or whatever. He's like, it's okay, just write it down. And it got to a point where it's like, I do enough of the like top versus bottom, left versus right, that like I could actually feel almost unequivocally that like, no, like in the middle of the session, there was a vibration here and then it just stopped. And then there was a vibration here. And then I could write it down, and then he would write it down, and then we would compare, and I'd be like, whoa, like halfway, you also felt the vibration shift? Like, okay, there's something here that's maybe not just my body. It's like something in the world of thoughts and the mental sphere and the spiritual space. And so then I think the one moment that I had was like, I was, I was in my third year, and I was doing internship interviews, and I had somehow stumbled upon like consulting interviews, and like I wasn't planning on doing an internship, but somehow I threw my resume and I got asked to do like a final round interview. So I was 2 interviews in, and I'm like freaking out. Like I've never done a case interview. I never thought to do consulting. All of my friends had like spent months preparing for these interviews, and I felt very much like very under the water and like overwhelmed. But I knew at that point I was like, I just need to keep meditating. I just need to like, it calms me down or it does something. And I remember the morning of the interview, I'm like, okay, I've done whatever I can. And I like, let me just sit to meditate. And I could feel I was very aware of the anxiety that I was facing. And when I sat to meditate, I could feel just like an overwhelming amount of vibration, like in the top right. And it was so clear, like there was without a doubt. And I was like, this is, the vibration that I'm feeling is like, I'm very anxious about this, of like messing up this interview. And I'm feeling a ton of vibration in the top right. And then I was like, I'm pretty sure this is related. And like, after the interview happened, I like checked the book and it was like, yep, fear and courage. 4th point, top right. And I was like, okay, I think there's something here. Like, I think they're related. And that was really like encouraging, I would say. It's like, you don't need to like read something in order for it to work out. You could feel it, collect the data yourself. Yes. And then when you feel ready for it, like go back and actually triangulate and be like, okay, like this is something.
It can work both ways. Like you read about it and you geek out about it, and then you kind of don't really understand or you forget, but then you experience it in the field in your system. Yeah. And then that's what I love about spiritual anatomy. It's, we've read Babaji's writings over time, but it's a little bit meatier, I guess I would say. Yeah. And so reading it again in a more modern, accessible way, it's just like, oh yeah. Yeah. And having more experience under your belt, it's like, oh yeah, I know what that is. Like I've swum in that water a little bit, or I've dipped my toe in that water, or I've seen it from afar. So it's really quite an adventure.
That's true.